Hello and welcome back to the Who's He Podcast YouTube channel. So, the latest season of The Mandalorian has finally wrapped with Chapter 24, The Return. After last week's cliffhanger with Din Djarin in the clutches of Moff Gideon, Bo-Katan and the rest of the Mandalorians on the run, has this episode managed to satisfactorily resolve the cliffhanger, and did it manage to wrap up this season in a nice little bow? Well, for me, it didn't, I'm afraid. I know that a lot of fans were disappointed at the short running time of the finale, but this wasn't my problem with it. A shorter than normal episode doesn't mean that you can't have a good finale to a season. But this has so many plates spinning plot-wise, I felt this episode kind of came up short. With Din Djarin escaping rather quickly and Grogu appearing out of nowhere to help, the sense of helplessness from last week's episode was quickly thrown out of the window. Yes, I know that a lot of people were thinking that Din Djarin would die in this episode, which I'm happy to say didn't happen. But the resolution to his capture was very convenient, and the only way I can see how Grogu was able to save the day, well, was him walking through a massive plot hole to get to where he needed to be. However, bringing Din and Grogu back together was what the show has been missing, and it was good to see the pair of them back as the centre of attention. However, Bo-Katan's escape was also convenient, with another hole in the ceiling for them to escape through. But another plot point we thought we were going to see resolved this week was who exactly were the spies from last week's episode. Well, we didn't get any resolution to this. Both of the suspects I listed last week, Axwos and the Armourer, were both instrumental in retaking Mandalore. So is this something that is going to carry over to another season? Well, I don't think it will. Also, I had no idea that Mandalorian armour could take them jetpacking into the upper atmosphere of a planet. Especially as a few episodes ago they ran out of fuel chasing a flying lizard across a desert, but well, you know, the plot demands it. Now then, Moff Gideon. After more or less sitting out the entire season, he returns with a plan more silly than his Mandalorian power armour. Yes, we finally find out that he was cloning himself with a little bit of the Force added to create an army of Force-wielding Gideons. So basically he became another cackling bad guy with dreams of, and soon I shall rule the universe. And his little clone army? Well, blown up by Din Djarin, so another plot point that went nowhere. But it wasn't all bad. The combat scenes were well done, though the Mandalorians fighting the Dark Troopers did look a little confusing as to who was who, but it was good to see Din Djarin and Grogu forming a team to take on the Praetorian Guards, with Grogu using the Force. Also, the fight between Moff Gideon, Din Djarin and Bo-Katan was okay, though a little too weighted in favour of Moff Gideon. But one thing irked me about this fight scene. After Moff Gideon demanding that Bo hand over the Darksaber, he then just, crushes it. So after building up the legend of whoever wields the Darksaber rules Mandalore, it's just destroyed, and Bo gets to rule Mandalore anyway, even though she lost the Darksaber in combat. Again, the plot demands it. And what of the Mythosaur? I said last week there would be no time in this episode to bring this into the mix, and sadly I was right. So is this for another season then? But despite a lot of people thinking this season would end with one of our heroes biting the bullet, it proved not to be, as Moff Gideon was seemingly engulfed in flames after Axwos crashed their cruiser into Gideon's base. But as we didn't see his body, I can only assume that he will return. So with Gideon gone and his base destroyed, the Mandalorians have retaken Mandalore and the Great Forge has been relit, which visually looked great. But how does this episode end? Well, Mando has now adopted Grogu, as now known as Din Grogu. So after all this time, we find out that Mando's first name was actually Djarin. But as Grogu is now also his apprentice, Djarin has to take him off on adventures to learn. So we leave them return to being a bounty hunter, but this time for the New Republic. And in return, he also gets hold of an IG droid head, which he uses to restore IG-11 to his former glory, and has him installed as the new Marshal of Navarro. And Djarin also takes up Greef Karga's offer of a place of his own. And this is where we end this season, with Djarin sitting on the porch and Grogu levitating frogs. So really, we have come full circle. Din Djarin is back to being a bounty hunter, which is where we first met him in Season 1. And the final scene seems to not only wrap up this season, but also Din and Grogu's story, with a little that's all folk style ending. Now, while no official word has been given that Season 4 is in production, the next season has been written. But if they decide to leave it here, that wouldn't be a bad thing, or at the very least, leave the Mandalorian alone for a couple of years before bringing it back. Story-wise, this season was all over the place, with a lot of Mission of the Week episodes that went nowhere, which is why we had a very rushed resolution. But as they have ended things with the possibility of it being a standalone bounty hunting Mission of the Week episodes, I really wouldn't mind that. And return to this format would bring back one thing that's been sorely missing this season, and that is the feel of a spaghetti western. And with that last scene of Djarin and Grogu in their new homestead, which was just like the end of an old western, for me, that really would be the way.